Hi, this is Lane8492. This is the only true crime story video I'm doing today. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the movie Fargo that was made in 1996 that involved the where that guy had apparently bumped off his accomplice and then disposed of his remains in the wood chipper, which was shown in the movie. Apparently, this wood chipper scene it was based off the murder of Helle Crafts, who was born Helle Lorck Nielsen. You see, Helle Crafts was a flight attendant and an immigrant from Denmark. She was married to her husband, Richard Crafts, who was an airline pilot and a volunteer auxiliary policeman. However, the story in Fargo was in the movie Minnesota. But the wood chipper scene that was in the movie would not take place in Minnesota in reality. It took place in the state of Connecticut. You see, Richard and Helle Crafts seemed like an all-perfect couple and that their marriage may have seemed all but perfect. But that could not be farther from the truth, because really behind the marriage between Richard and Helle Crafts was one that was really about to go down in flames. You see, Helle Crafts suspected that Richard B. Crafts was apparently having an affair behind her back, and from what I read, she was also terrified of Richard Crafts because he had one nasty temper. So Helle Crafts who decided to hire a private investigator to see what her husband Richard Crafts was up to. Turns out, after this private investor's investigation, he confirmed all of her suspicions. It confirmed everything, that it turns out Richard Crafts was indeed having an affair behind Helle Crafts' back. Richard Crafts didn't realize it, but his wife Helle Crafts had been on to him for some time. She needed to file for divorce. Richard Crafts felt that a divorce was not going to look good for him. You see, Richard and Helle Crafts was married and they had 3 kids, a son named Andrew Crafts, Thomas Crafts, and a daughter, Christina Crafts. The last time Helle Crafts would be seen was after she had gotten from a flight to and from Germany as a flight attendant, which she did for a living. She also told her friends if anything were to happen to her, she said she don't ever think that she would just disappear like that. There was not much for the police to go on. But eventually, and of course, Richard Crafts took a lie detector test and passed because he thought he committed the perfect crime. Of course, there was a time when Ted Bundy took a lie detector test and he passed it as well, even though he did what he did. Soon the police put their suspicion on Richard. Turns out, the last time that Helle Crafts was seen after she had gotten from a flight to and from Germany, Richard and Helle Crafts got into an argument. And there, Richard Crafts apparently bludgeoned Helle Crafts over the head with a blunt object. And he put her corpse in a freezer. He waited till the corpse was frozen, where he took a chainsaw and dismembered her corpse. And as a result, Richard Crafts paid $900 on a credit card to rent a wood chipper. And it was on a November wintry blizzard night next to Lake Zorin, Connecticut, a person saw Richard Crafts using the wood chipper. Turns out he was using the wood chipper to dispose of Helle's remains, to wipe out any traces of evidence that could incriminate him in the crime. Apparently, Richard Crafts thought he had gotten away with it. But turns out, after an investigation, Richard Crafts was indicted for the murder of his wife, Helle Crafts. However, this first trial would end in a hung jury, to where the jury could not come up with a verdict. But he wasn't out of the woods, because a hung jury and an acquittal are 2 different things. Hung jury means that they still have a chance to be put on trial again. However, if it's an acquittal, they can't again, because it would be double jeopardy in the U.S. Constitution. However, they moved for a new trial against Richard Crafts. He was indicted. This time, the jury had a verdict. Richard Crafts was found guilty of murder, of murdering his wife, Helle Crafts. National headlines, it made international headlines. As I said, it was the inspiration for the woodchipper scene in the 1996 movie Fargo that had William H. Macy, Steve Buscemi, Frances McDormand, and Peter Stormare. Richard Crafts was sentenced to 50 years in a Connecticut state prison. Of course, he was paroled, and from what last I read, he currently resides in a homeless veterans shelter since he's a veteran. He able to do the job he once did because he's too old. This year, Richard Crafts is going to be 88, being that he was born in 1937. And of course, Helle Crafts was born in 1947. But this was one where Richard Crafts almost thought he had committed the perfect crime. This is one of the few cases where they got a conviction against the perpetrator without the body because there wasn't really much left of Helle Crafts, being that Richard Crafts had dismembered her and disposed of her remains in a woodchipper. I saw this story also on Forensic Files and also on Mansion Murders. Mattress the size of a grapefruit was found by the Crafts nanny, and she was interviewed by the police about it and gave all the information that they needed to prove that indeed Richard Crafts was the perpetrator in the murder of his wife, Helle Crafts. And this is what led to him going to prison, and now he resides in a homeless shelter. Well, hope you enjoy this video and let me know what you think. Thanks.